Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Wentworth Resources PLC post-AGM presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, attendees will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged. They can be submitted at any time using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just simply type in your questions at any time and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and will publish those responses on the Investor Meet Company platform. I'd now like to hand over to CEO Catherine Rowe. Good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Thank you for the introduction, and good morning, everybody who's registered to join. We very much appreciate you taking the time to join this morning, which may well be Wentworth Resources' final AGM ahead of the completion of the transaction with Moreland We've held our AGM just earlier this morning, and we will be publishing the results of those resolutions later on today. Given the situation with the transaction, a lot of the focus of this presentation will just be an update on that and maybe a little bit of background about the Wentworth journey over the last decade or so, and why we are where we are today. So I just move through this first slide, just a reminder of the MMP transaction that we recommended just over a year ago. It was a cash acquisition by Moreland, who is our operating partner in our single asset in Mnazi Bay in Tanzania. And that offer was 32.5 pence per share. It represented a 30% premium and was a material increase to the initial approach that was made by Moreland. So whilst unsolicited from Moreland, we did achieve a price per share that we thought was the best monetization liquidity event for shareholders. Subsequent to that recommendation by the board, we sought shareholder approval in February this year for a scheme of arrangement with a 75% threshold, so a supermajority threshold, and that was successfully passed in February. Since then, we've been working, or Moreland have been working with the government stakeholders to achieve the approvals and conditions required for the successful completion of the transaction. When the recommendation was made last December, we agreed a long stop date of the 31st of December 2023, and recognizing that it does take time in a jurisdiction such as Tanzania, but with various other consents required. So it has been a long stop date that represents a little bit of extra time than you might normally see, but we are hopeful of concluding and successfully completing the transaction within the long stop date. I'll just move on to the next slide just to represent a little bit of background to the transaction. It also helps to explain the Wentworth journey over the last few years, certainly since I've been involved for nearly 10 years. We're very proud of the delivery and the performance of the business over that time. I think these charts really reflect just what we've been able to do as a board, as a management team, and fundamentally actually with the team in country, but really about the performance of the asset. What we've been able to do is deleverage over this time, so repay our debt and build that cash, and that's the strength of the balance sheet that you can see. And as a consequence of that, we've been able to deliver shareholder returns since we started our dividend policy in 2019. We've also done some share buyback as well, with a view to supplementing that shareholder return. You can see we've increased production, and again, working with Moreland as operator, the field has performed incredibly well over that time, and that has allowed the strength of these fundamentals that we see here. So moving on, what does that mean in the context of what we've done with the business, and also why it's the right time to monetize? We have come a long way, and we've really strengthened the business, but it does now turn into a different chapter for the asset. Just going as a bit of an overview here, we've been in the Mnazi Bay production sharing agreement since 2004, and since that time we've really benefited from historical cost recovery, and that has really helped that increased that increase in revenue and cash that you saw on the previous slide, because we've been able to take a disproportionate amount of revenue because of the cost pools. Those historic cost pools are now depleted. They depleted earlier this year, which puts us in what we call a profit gas environment, where our take is lower because we don't have the benefit of cost recovery. And that will continue to be the case until we reinvest, or the partnership reinvests into the asset, and costs are put back into the cost pool. And we're very much, to a large extent, dependent on the operator to dictate and drive that investment back into the asset. It's also required because we're at peak production at the moment, and we've benefited from very strong production this year, which we're very pleased with. But we are now at a point that we're unable to really go beyond current rates without further investment. And there's going to be material capex required to maintain and increase production from current levels. And that really helps to underpin the opportune moment to monetize the value of this asset. We don't have the strength of balance sheet that is really required to fund further investment in this asset. And we believe that, without wanting to dilute shareholders going forward, that this is the right time to monetize and to see that liquidity. We, again, just share this just as a bit of context as to where the offer sits in relation to share price performance over the last few years. We show here our share price, but also our TSR, which includes the dividends and the capital returns, because actually, that's part of the return for shareholders who've been invested in Wentworth. It's obviously not just the share price, but that total return. And you can see the offer price there in the yellow bar. And for us, that really shows that it would have been difficult to get to that level of pence per share for shareholders in an organic scenario. And again, it helps to underpin the board's recommendation for this transaction. And without that further capital investment that I just mentioned back into the asset, without any operational risk, I think we've been very fortunate that the asset has performed that way. But you never know when something can happen that can add risk to that, and also time value of money. And those are really what we underpin to support our recommendation. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, is where we're at and the status of the transaction. Well aware that it's been quite a long time since that recommendation. Tim, our chair, alluded to that at the AGM, that it's taken the best part of the long stop date to reach a conclusion. However, we are reaching a conclusion. There have been some very positive discussions recently between all stakeholders that gives the government comfort for the transaction to proceed. And it was on the back of that we, Wentworth, proceeded to book court sanction for the 19th of December, which is next Tuesday. So we will be going to the Jersey court next week to formally sanction the transaction. Once that's successful, completion will occur from the 21st of December. There's 3 key conditions that are required ahead of court sanction. There's a TPDC waiver of preemption, which has been received, the Minister of Energy approval, which has been received, and the Fair Competition Commission approval, which we expect imminently in the coming day or two. Those will be received and submitted to the court ahead of court sanction on Tuesday. And as I say, completion is effective from the 21st of December, and credited accounts no later than the 4th of January. So by the 4th of January, all shareholders will have received their funds. So that was all from me at this stage. I'm happy to take obviously any Q&A from the audience. And we have one question in the audience first, which I'll take. Thank you.
Let's be optimistic or realistic maybe and assume the deal goes ahead. From what I've heard, we as shareholders won't have to give further approvals in due course, the money will just be credited to our account. So
That's-
we won't have to do anything.
No, you don't have to do anything.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
it just comes in automatically. And I think it's worth, you do raise an interesting point. I think it's worth a reminder that the money, as part of the takeover panel rules, when you have a cash acquisition, there's a cash confirmation required. So the funds have been sitting in an escrow account for now just over a year. So the funds are there and they're in an escrow account. So there's no risk to shareholders that payment won't come through.
Yeah, thank you.
It might be worth reminding shareholders to ensure that their details are correct.
Yes, that's a good point. Make sure your payment details are correct in your bank account. I guess that's for the audience as well. Any shareholders, just ensure that everything is up to date and accurate so that you addresses, contact details.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Catherine, if there's no further questions from the room, maybe I can come in with some that we've received online, if that is appropriate time to do that.
Yeah, please do, Mark.
Lovely, thank you. Let's turn to the first question. Is are you now confident that the deal will complete before the long stop date? I know you've touched on it, but just for clarity.
Yes, yeah, I think we are very confident. I think the negotiations between Moral and Prom and the government have ensured genuine alignment with the government's position. And as I say, there's one formal condition precedent that's still outstanding that we have a lot of comfort will come through.
Thanks, Catherine. Let's turn to the next question. Do you regret agreeing to this deal given the strong operational performance and build-up of cash since it was first announced?
I think I've tried to explain just now the underpinning of the recommendation of the board. I don't think that's changed. There's nothing, yes, we've had an operationally strong year, but I think the cost recovery, the position on the disputed cost pool still remains quite an unresolved issue. The profit gas environment that I mentioned, the lack of control within the JV as operator, all of those things still underpin the 32.5 pence per share offer. So it's very much still supported from the board.
Thank you. Just turning back to the long stop date. Of course, this isn't. This is just a follow-on. Will you extend the long stop date if the deal hasn't completed?
I think we'd need to assess why. It's difficult to answer that yes and no. I think we'd need to assess very carefully the situation in which an extension would be required. So we are very mindful that it's been a long stop date, and it's taken time to get here, and there is limited appetite for an extension unless there was a very good reason to do so.
Thank you. And I think at the moment, this is probably the penultimate question from Jorgen. Is there a chance that payment would occur in 2023?
There is a chance. I think it's typically expected that it goes to the deadline. I think realistically, just to manage expectations, it typically goes to that last deadline date. And that's the case for a lot of transactions of this nature.
Thank you, Catherine. For the time being, that concludes the online questions, unless there's any further from the room. And if there isn't any further questions from the room, perhaps a couple of closing comments before I redirect those on the call to give you their feedback.
Okay, well, thank you, Mark. And again, thank you, everybody who's listening and who's taken the time to join today. It's been very much a journey for all of us at Wentworth, and it's time for a new chapter. But we really appreciate shareholders' loyalty, support throughout this time, and look forward to maybe seeing and meeting you all again in the future. But thank you again, and have a good Christmas.
That's great. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you to the board of Wentworth Resources for updating attendees today. Can I please ask attendees not to close this session, as we'll now automatically redirect you for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the board can better understand your views and expectations. This may take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the board of Wentworth Resources PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good morning to you all.